I laughed when my friends called him beta male at our wedding. He smiled and executed his master plan. You know how people say the first year of marriage is usually the best? Well, that's a big lie, and I'm a living witness of that. Hello, Reddits. My name is Chloe, and I'm 26 years old. I've been married for about 3 months now. And you'd think that in the first year of marriage, especially the first 3 to 6 months, we will still be mushy and all lovey-dovey, but that's not the case in my marriage. Even though we've only been married for less than a year, my marriage has crumbled right from the beginning, and honestly, I don't know where I stand right now. It had been because of a harmless joke. My friends at my wedding had been too excited and perhaps a bit drunk, and they had made a careless joke, which has successfully ruined my marriage before it even started. Eddie and I have been together for the longest time. In fact, our friends were always saying that they wouldn't be surprised if we were awarded Couple of the Year at every dinner the company we both work for. Yes, Eddie, my husband, and I work in the same company, and although I have a higher position than Eddie, he had never really minded. In fact, I met Eddie at work. He had been transferred to our own branch because he requested to be. I eventually found out the reason was because he wanted to be closer to his family, and not just because he wanted fresh air or a new area. Eddie is a big family person, and when we started dating, he had always started to talk about starting our family and kids. But I wasn't much of a family person, so it was all my fault that we dated for 5 whole years before finally getting married. Eddie kept talking about marriage, and I would usually put it off and give excuses why we shouldn't get married yet. I loved and still love Eddie very much. In fact, when we met, it was love at first sight. I didn't think there was anyone else for me besides Eddie, and he apparently thought the same, because within a week of meeting, we started dating. Everyone at our workplace knew about us. We were the work couple. And Eddie is the most romantic person I know. He's really sweet, and he loved giving me gifts even if it were little things. He would drop fresh flowers on my desk and clear out the ones that were dried up, because according to him, he wanted me to have a beautiful morning like the flowers. Whenever I had deadlines and had to stay back, he would offer to stay with me and help me sometimes. If he couldn't stay back, he would offer to pick me up or order me a taxi. He was really sweet and the kind of man every woman would pray for. My friends, both from our place of work and the ones that weren't from our place of work, envied me and always prayed to have a man like Eddie. He was understanding and very patient. He hardly got angry with me, and whenever I nagged, he tried his best to calm me down. He was simply the best. Now you wonder what must have happened that made my marriage not as enjoyable as my relationship had been? Well, the thing is, my friends actually knew one secret about me that Eddie didn't. You see, despite the fact that Eddie was really sweet and all, I've always liked me a man that was dominant and was bossy and also likes to be in control. Eddie wasn't that sort of person. And aside from the fact that I fell for him at first sight, I wanted something different in my relationship. I've always been attracted to bossy men, and they end up frustrating my life. So I had decided before I met Eddie that I wasn't going to date a bossy man again, even if I was attracted to him. So when I met Eddie, he was like a breath of fresh air, and I liked it so much. But after a while, it got boring with him. He didn't like to exert his authority or even try to dominate. He'll rather people understand what he wanted and why he wanted what he wanted instead of insisting. Although that had been one of the things that made him very valuable at our workplace, it pissed me off. I wanted him to just show that part of him that was dominant. And our sex life, too. It was just unsatisfying. Not because Eddie didn't try to satisfy me. In fact, he always made sure I had an orgasm before he had his. But the fact that he wasn't dominant again in bed threw me off. I wanted him to be the sort of male that took and didn't care about my needs until he was satisfied himself. I wanted that rough edge to his romantic side, but no matter how much I tried, Eddie still was the same person I knew. I complained to my friends about it, and one of them had said I was just being sensitive and that Eddie was the best man for me. So I kept on with it, but I was getting frustrated, and I even stopped sexual activities with Eddie for a while. I thought he would actually try and seduce me to bed after I told him about my decision. He had just asked me why, and when I told him I didn't just want it. Eddie agreed with me. He didn't disturb me for sex for a whole week. I knew he was really horny, especially because I kept trying to unconsciously seduce him, but he still wouldn't ask me or even try to force me to have sex. It made me angry, and I just ignored him for another 3 days, and despite his attempts to find out what was wrong, I left him guessing. Soon after, I was promoted at work. Everyone thought that Eddie would be jealous and we would eventually end up breaking up. But Eddie had done the cutest thing instead. He had taken me to a very romantic and expensive restaurant to celebrate, and after the meal, he had given me a gift. It was a matching set of heels and bags that he wanted me to wear on my first day in my new office. I was really happy and pleased that he was genuinely happy for me. But to be honest, I hadn't gotten my promotion because I deserved it. I have always eyed that position, and once it became vacant, I did everything I could to get there. And by everything, I mean everything. I tried bribing my way to the top, and it was my body he had requested for. I gave it. Yes. I slept with my boss to get the position I got. The position was originally meant to be occupied by Eddie because he earned it, but I wanted to just be selfish for once and get what I needed through what I had. Eddie didn't know that, of course. He didn't know that he had been recommended for that position and that I took it by sleeping with our boss to get it. I thought it was going to be a one-time thing and that was going to be all there is. But one thing that comes with maintaining your position, especially when you got it through dubious means, is you have to keep tying up loose ends. And in my case, it meant I had to keep sleeping with my boss. But then again, it had its advantages and disadvantages. I got to maintain my position at work, and then I got some sexual satisfaction other than with Eddie. The disadvantage was that I had to lie and lie so that Eddie wouldn't find out about the truth, which he eventually did anyway. I told my friends about sleeping with my boss, but it had been a slip-up. We were having a girls' night at Evie's place that night, and drinks got too much and words let loose from the tongue. And before the night ended, we were all confessing our secrets, mine being the huge one amongst them all. My friends had been shocked, and they had eventually asked me silly questions like who was better in bed between Eddie and my boss. I made them swear not to tell any other person, especially Eddie. They did, and I trusted them with my life. I should have been suspicious of Dora. She was the only one who didn't drink that night. She only took a sip of alcohol and had made excuses of driving back home, even though it was supposed to be a sleepover. She made excuses for work, and when I spilled my secrets, she looked at me with disgust and some anger, which I couldn't even explain before, but now I understand better. Dora had always been in love with Eddie. She worked in the same company as Eddie and I did, and she worked closely with Eddie. She always had a soft spot for Eddie, but I had dismissed it as friendship. Had I known she had an ulterior motive, I wouldn't have spilled my guts like I did right in front of her. But I didn't know all that at that point, and I didn't think she would betray me like that. I continued sleeping with my boss, and for some reason I started to enjoy being shared by both men. One was dominant and rough on the edge, just about the right amount of sarcasm, and he was really selfish, while the other was gentle and not rough and didn't like sarcasm, in fact loathes it. On one side was Joe, my lover and boss, and on the other was Eddie, my boyfriend and also my coworker. Everything became really thrilling. I would go with Joe to different parties and places under the pretense of work, and he would then whisk me up to a room in a hotel he had booked previously so we could have wild sex. When I say wild, I mean wild. Joe was as crazy as I am when it came to sex. All he wanted was to dominate and take, and I wanted someone like that. So we were a perfect fit. Joe wasn't ready for any relationship, and he knew definitely about my relationship with Eddie, but didn't seem to mind as he wanted no attachment, as he would say. It was the perfect arrangement, really, except only Eddie was kept in the dark about it. A month of being with my boss, I met another man, Steve. I met Steve through Joe, and he was Joe's best pal. Prior to that time, I hadn't met Steve because he was apparently out of town, so when he came back and he and Joe started hanging out with me. I knew Steve liked me the moment he met me. He kept looking at me, and even when Joe whispered in a not-so-gentle voice that I had a boyfriend and was only there with him for sexual favors, he didn't seem to mind. It pissed me off, though, when Joe said that about me, but I had no choice but to smile and pretend like I didn't hear the comment. If I thought Joe was dominant and bossy, then Steve was his boss in that department. Steve had to control everything. Our conversations, even when we met and everything else. I was very attracted to Steve, and I knew it. He knew it, too. Steve and I started sneaking behind Joe's back to have sex. I liked sex with Steve even better than Joe's. Sex was just phenomenal with Steve because of how dominant he was. He liked his women tied up and even beaten up. I don't mean excessive abuse. You get what I mean. He liked it when I begged him for orgasm and how he would spank me until my skin around my bottom was red and tender. And everything he did to me sexually turned me on even more. And I liked it. I even stopped having regular sex with Eddie because I wasn't turned on by him anymore. I didn't tell my friends, though. I didn't want them finding out about Steve. I didn't want to look like a slut to them because they already knew about Joe. So I kept everything between Steve and I a secret. It was fun while it lasted. Juggling 3 men, and I thought myself a princess. Being wanted by 3 men at the same time. It felt thrilling. I didn't think about the consequences or what could happen if Eddie especially found out about the other 2 men. The guilt didn't come at that time. I didn't feel guilty. I convinced myself that I was only satisfying my desires and that it was for a short while anyways. No one else will know. Or rather, I thought no one else would. The relationship between Steve and I didn't last that long, though. Being with Steve, who demanded so much of my body and time, was rather exhausting, especially when I had to deal with 2 other men. I had to let one go. And it wasn't Eddie, because I love him very much. It couldn't be Joe, because he was the only reason why I was having a position I had no credit for. Steve was the only one I didn't gain anything from. Well, except sex. Steve wasn't exactly happy about my decision when I told him we couldn't continue. He had been angry and had refused, threatening to expose me to Joe if I tried to stop whatever was going on between us. I called off his bluff and started avoiding him. I knew his friendship with Joe meant a lot to him, especially business-wise, and he couldn't afford to lose Joe's friendship and trust. So I didn't even think much of what he said. Eventually, he backed off when he saw that I wasn't going to change my mind about it. I was happy because it meant I had only 2 men as I did back then, and it was easier dealing with them. I would lie to Eddie about having work to finish and then stay back at the office only to go out with Joe to his home where we do our usual. And everything was fine for a while. But I eventually got tired of living a double life again, especially when Eddie was so patient and kind to me and he wasn't even cheating on me. I didn't feel guilty with Steve in the picture, but I started to feel guilty just afterwards. The reason why I started to feel guilty wasn't just because of the fact that Eddie is very patient and loving. It was mainly because we had gone to an event together. It had been hosted by Eddie's mom, who was a social right activist and knew a lot of people because of her line of work. The event had been about something related to what she did, but I wasn't so interested in what the event was about. I was just glad for an opportunity to dress up. When we got there, although Eddie never left my side, people swarmed him, especially the ladies, and despite the fact that he was with me, it's like they successfully ignored me. One lady had even whispered to my ears that I was so lucky I was with Eddie, and that if she had the opportunity to cheat on her boyfriend with Eddie, she wouldn't think twice. The statement, however upsetting, just somehow stuck. It was like I was seeing Eddie again for the first time. I started to feel guilty for cheating on someone like him. It sounds crazy, right? I didn't feel guilty when I was sleeping around with 2 different men, but felt guilty and jealous seeing ladies throw themselves at him. I tried to break my relationship up with Joe, but it wasn't as easy as I had thought initially. Joe wouldn't budge, and then again, I had everything to lose while he would lose only a little. He knew that fact and threatened me with it. Instead of calling his bluff like I did with Steve, I couldn't. So I had no choice but to continue seeing him. And then one idea popped into my head. Marriage was a great way to avoid Joe. I mean, who would have sex with a married woman? I thought it was the perfect way to avoid Joe, so I started working towards it. Knowing that I was the one who spoke against marriage throughout our relationship, I knew just the right words would get the ship sailing again. So I started hinting about marriage to Eddie. I would lie about my friends talking about marriage and its advantages. I even started us on watching romantic movies, and each one had proposing scenes in it. I kept making sure all our discussions led to marriage topics, and that I was really positive about it. Eddie took the hint, and he had proposed to me on my birthday. It was really lovely, and he had even invited our friends and family to witness the beautiful moment. I was so happy, and I couldn't even sleep that night. I just kept staring at my flashy ring that must have caused a leg and hand to get. Although marriage had been my escape route from Joe before Eddie actually proposed to me. But after the proposal and I kept staring at the ring in my hand and how beautiful it was, I felt it was the right choice. I love Eddie, and I wanted forever with him. But sadly, that has not been the case since we got married. Soon after the proposal, Eddie quit working in our company as he got a better and bigger offer, and the company paid twice as much as the company we worked for. Eddie was so happy, and I was too. But it didn't stop me from still cheating with Joe. It was like my goodbye gift to him. Or so I thought. Joe wasn't too pleased when he found out about the proposal, but he said nothing, just removed his clothes and demanded my presence on his bed. He wanted me to keep my ring out of his sight while we have sex. Perhaps for him to feel less guilty or something? 3 weeks before my wedding, my girls and I were hanging out as usual. There was nothing odd, and we were having the time of our lives. One of them had casually asked if I was still sleeping with Joe. I nodded, and the rest of my friends whistled and clapped their hands. They thought I was a bad girl keeping a relationship for 5 years and also a man on the side. Although Dora didn't laugh along or share their sentiments. She just stayed quiet and watched everyone. After the whole thing, I asked Dora to be my best woman, but she refused almost immediately, coming up with silly excuses. I had been so angry, and I had asked another one of our friends, who had agreed almost immediately. A week before our wedding, Eddie started to act really odd. He never calls anymore or sends me a text every night to wish me a peaceful sleep. Whenever I did call him, he was always in a hurry to end the call. Even when I went over to his place, he barely paid me attention or listened to me. It was like he was just in his own world, and I thought it was just the wedding stress, so I didn't really bother much about it. I wish I had now, because maybe everything that has happened, especially after our wedding, wouldn't have. The eve of my wedding came, and the girls and I stayed in a hotel room. We had fun and danced and played lots of games. Eventually, everyone fell asleep out of exhaustion, and so they wouldn't be swollen and hungover for my big day. Everyone had fallen asleep except me. Joe and I had planned to meet up that evening for a goodbye sex. I agreed to it because it was going to be the last time. He had rented a room close to mine so I could sneak in and out. After everyone had fallen asleep, I sneaked out and went to meet Joe. We had sex through most of the night, and then he allowed me to go back to my room. I thought that was it. That it was all over. That I didn't have to care about hiding relationships or lying every day to Joe about where it was I was or who it was I was with. Everything was finally perfect. Until it wasn't. On our wedding day, everything started perfectly normal. Happy bride, teary parents, and the awning crowd. Except the groom didn't exactly look happy. I didn't mind, though. I thought he was just feeling stressed. He said his vows like he was asked to read a death sentence from a court book, and he didn't even kiss me when it got to the part of, "You may kiss the bride." He looked at me and just pecked my cheeks afterwards. I knew something was wrong then, but I just didn't want anything to ruin my wedding, including my groom. My friends made the party afterwards very fun. I danced and laughed happily with them. I didn't even mind that Eddie didn't have the first dance with me as required. I wanted to make the most of the day, and I planned to accuse him and demand an answer for his annoying behavior throughout the wedding. And then my friends, being a little drunk during the party, decided to say something. It was Bella who said it, and then the rest of us laughed. Bella said that my husband looked like a beta male because he didn't know about the alpha in the picture. We all laughed. They didn't know that I had ended things with Joe prior that time because I didn't tell them that. My priority had been getting married. I didn't know that Eddie overheard us. I didn't turn. Maybe if I had turned just a little, I would have seen him standing right behind us while we made jest of him. He didn't say anything about it throughout the party, though. He waited till we got home, and that was when I decided to shout at him and demand he explain why he was the gloomy groom at our wedding. Eddie just looked at me while I nagged without saying a word. Then when I realized that, I kept quiet. But it was then Eddie decided to speak up. He knew. He knew everything. How I slept with Joe to get the position that was his originally. How I moved on to sleep with 3 men without minding that I was cheating on him. He even knew that I had sneaked into Joe's hotel room after everyone had slept. I wanted to deny everything he was saying, but I couldn't. It was the truth, and I didn't know how to contend with it. He told me he got married to me not because he was in love with me anymore, but because he didn't want to embarrass his family by canceling out what they've taken time to plan. And also because he wanted to torture me. He said he would make sure to destroy me, and it would happen bit by bit. The marriage had been the first step in my torture. I didn't know what to say. I tried begging, but Eddie just looked at me in disgust, and then left that evening and didn't come back until the next day. Eddie continued ignoring me for days, despite every attempt to beg him. I even tried to seduce him, but he had just stared at my naked body in disgust. I knew that Eddie would never forgive me. And I didn't know how he found out about everything because I thought I was so careful with everything I did. I didn't think he would figure out everything, including Steve. But that had been cleared up when I saw Dora in my home a month after my wedding. I thought she was coming to visit me at first, but she made it clear that she came to see Eddie. I was shocked when she kissed Eddie on the lips right in front of me. It was then I realized who it was that told Eddie everything. It was Dora. And Eddie must have investigated further and found out about Steve and also about me sleeping with Joe again the night before our wedding. Eddie and Dora started hanging out, and they literally went everywhere and anywhere together. They became a couple, even though we were still married legally. And the worst thing is, I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't say anything because it meant everyone discovering my secrets. I honestly don't know what to do at this point. It's been a torturous 3 months of marriage, and I haven't had any peace. I want Eddie back. Seeing him with Dora every time takes a piece of my heart, and I cannot bear it any longer. I know I did stupid things. Horrible, in fact. But I'm really sorry, and I really want to work things out with Eddie desperately. So please, guys, what's your advice? What can I do? I'm so exhausted and desperate. Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been a few weeks since my last post, and I wish I could say that everything is better, but it's not. Things have gotten from bad to worse, and I literally cannot do anything about it. The last post I made here seeking some advice on how to get Eddie back got mostly hateful comments. Everyone apparently thinks I'm the devil, and I deserve all I'm facing right now. I totally agree with you guys. But it's so awful going through all of these. Apparently, Eddie didn't stop at just dating my friend. He had proceeded in ruining me further. He had somehow gotten pictures of Joe and I, and then Steve with me, and he had sent it to my workplace. I didn't even know all that happened because I walked into the office that day with my head high. I didn't want people knowing that I had issues in my marriage, so I decided to pretend everything was fine. The eyes and whispering started as soon as I walked by, but I didn't think anything of it. Until I got summoned by the board and I was shown the pictures. I was so shocked, and there was no way to defend myself. The board of directors had asked me to resign peacefully. It was probably a way to save their faces. They didn't want to come across as harsh by firing me directly. They wanted me to quit myself because it would seem like I was too ashamed to work there. They even had the letter prepped already. I only had to sign it, which I did, having no other choice in the matter. I got home and got the shock of my life when I saw everyone in my family sitting in the living room looking at me like I had 2 horns attached to my forehead. My mom had been so angry, and she had gotten up probably to slap me, but my sister had stopped her. She pointed shaky fingers at me and swore that if she saw me around her family, clearly didn't involve me anymore, she would do something she might end up in prison for. My siblings had to take her away from the house, and not once did they look at me. I'm sure they felt disgusted by me and what I have done. Eddie's family was the worst. Eddie's sisters had threatened that I either moved out of the house or they threw me out. His mother nearly spat at me. Everyone hates me now. And now they don't seem to mind Dora. In fact, she was there to witness my disgrace in front of my family. I'm sure she feels victorious. My life is totally in ruins. Eddie has sent me divorce papers right after I moved out of the house. He didn't even waste his time at all. He brought nemesis upon me in the most cruel way, and I don't know how to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. I feel very broken and shattered. I ruined myself. I did all of that to myself, and I had stupidly thought I could get away with things. Now I have nothing more than time on my hands to think and then cry myself to sleep, only to wake up again and start the same process. I wonder now what possessed me into thinking that I could actually get away with everything, but I cannot even blame the devil because it was all me. I did this to myself. I ruined my life with my own hands. I was selfish, and I ended up self-destructing. It's so sad how lonely I am now. Everyone has turned their back against me. Even the friends who had laughed and compared Joe to Eddie. They have all abandoned me. It started first with ignoring my calls, and then there were canceled outings, which they would text me that was canceled when it actually isn't. Then eventually they stopped pretending to be my friend. I'm a loser now, and the most painful thing is, I don't even have the chance to make everything right. I couldn't even if I tried now, could I? I've destroyed everything beyond repair. My life is officially over. I wish so desperately that I could turn back the hands of time and undo most of the things I did. Maybe right now I wouldn't be sitting in a damp room with noises from every part outside and neighbors that bang my door every night to keep my sobbing down as they're trying to sleep. Perhaps I will still be very much happy and maybe preparing to have a child with Eddie. Perhaps I will not be this unhappy and sad and miserable, but I had purposely chosen the wrong path, and now I'm more than doomed. The question of what ifs keep roaming my mind each day, and I feel even more guilty by each passing day. What if I hadn't resorted to cheating to get a position that wasn't mine to have in the first place? What if I wasn't so selfish and crazy enough to have slept with Joe, my boss? What if I hadn't slept with Joe and Steve? What if I hadn't been so stupid as to think I'll have Eddie by my side forever? What ifs, what ifs, what ifs? Questions I have no answers to now because there's no changing what I did. There's no healing from the pain I caused. And there's no saving for me because I deserve everything I have coming my way. I feel so awful and it's so painful living like this, to be honest. Tell me, guys, will I continue living like this? Or will this pain that is seemingly increasing every day continue forever? I don't know if I could cope. I'm so tired, sad, and most of all, regretful. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's me again. This is probably my last post here. I'm glad that even though it was all hateful comments, I at least got some attention, even though my reality is a direct opposite. Things are still pretty much the same around here. I'm now officially divorced within 6 months of marriage. I'm still lonely and unhappy. I said in my last post that I fear that this may be what the rest of my life would look like. Well, I don't fear now, I know. This really is going to be my painful reality for the rest of my life. Eddie is making sure of that. It really is true what they say about hindsight being 20/20. I mean, it's easy to see what should have been done only after it's too late. But in my case, I only see now what I should never have done in the beginning now that it's too late. If I had one wish, just one wish to make, it would be to go back in time and undo my stupid actions. Maybe if I had done that originally, I would not be stuck in this abyss. I would be the loving and loved wife of my husband Eddie, and we would go everywhere together and have beautiful kids that will look so much like Eddie. Maybe by now I would already be heavily pregnant and expecting our first child, but now that will never happen because Eddie will never forgive me or forget what I did. And he also has Dora. Their relationship is official and our friends are supporting them while ignoring me. They seem so perfect together. And I'm certain that Dora will never in a million years cheat on Eddie. She has waited for such an opportunity for the longest time, and now she has it. I'm sure she would never do anything to hurt Eddie, like I have. I should have treated Eddie like that too. Like a treasure that he is. I should have never cheated on him like I did, and now all I'm left with is shame, regrets, and a life that's almost worth not living. I ruined my life with my very hands, and I regret so badly what I did. I cannot even forgive myself for ruining my perfect life with my own hands without much prompting. I could have avoided all of these. If I wasn't so greedy and callous enough to think that was the only way to get a promotion. Dominant men, dominant my foot. I was selfish and I kept comparing Eddie to every man that was what he wasn't. What I didn't realize was that was what made Eddie special. It was what made him unique and able to stand out amongst all the other men I've ever met. And I should have been grateful and stuck with that, but instead I had chosen a path of destruction. The dominance I craved so badly has ended up putting me in lots of trouble, one which I can never get out of. I feel really sad and stupid. This is what the rest of my life entails. Regretting and wishing I hadn't ended up like this. There's no other Eddie out there, and even if there was, I'm sure he wouldn't even want me because of how much I've messed up. The future feels very bleak. Like it's promising me pain and sadness and emptiness. I already feel all of that. Perhaps it's promising more of it. Well, I wish no one ends up like me, even if you do not like me very much. It pays to just learn from the mistakes of others rather than to learn from yours. Believe me, I'm learning very bitter lessons from everything I did, so learn from my very painful and sad life. Thanks and goodbye.